One needle in one length is all you need for circular knitting. Say hello to Magic Loop. No more double-pointed needles, no more microcircular needles, just one long needle that can do pretty much everything. Hi, I'm Davina from sheepandstitch.com. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through Magic Loop step by step so that you can knit socks, sleeves, mittens, hats, and all kinds of small circumference things on one long circular needle. So if you want to knit in the round without double pointed needles, save some money on circular needles, knit more ergonomically, or just learn a really cool technique, then let me show you how to Magic Loop. So I've cast on about 32 stitches on my needle, and now we're ready to join this in the round. So I'm gonna just grab my stitches and drag it off the needle and onto the cable. Great. So let's take a look at our stitches. You can see that one end of the stitches has the working yarn coming out of it, and that's the yarn that's attached to our ball of yarn. The other end of our stitches does not have any yarn coming out of it. So what I want to do is position the side with the yarn coming out of it further away from me. So I'm just going to literally turn my stitches so that the side with the working yarn is now far away from me, and the side that has no working yarn is closer to me. All right, so now what we're going to do is fold our stitches in half. So I'm just going to fold it like this, and I can do that because the cable is really nice and flexible. Now I'm just going to eyeball the halfway mark right here, and then I'm just going to pull the cable through the stitches so that the stitches are now split in half, right? I've got half on one side, half on the other side of the cable. So once we have our stitches split, I want to make sure that they're not twisted. So just like when we're knitting in the round, we don't want our cast on stitches to be twisted like this, because when you join in the round, that twist gets embedded in your knitting. So just make sure that your stitches are all pointing in the same direction. When I fold my stitches and just turn it upside down, you can see there's this like braided edge, right? On both sides of these stitches. So I want to make sure that the braided edge are both facing the same direction. In this situation, they're both facing upwards. If one side was facing down, then I'd know that my stitches are twisted and I would need to untwist them so that the braided edge is both facing the same direction. Now I'm going to push the stitches onto both of the needles. Might be a little tight. So take a look at this. Both tips of the needle are facing to the right, and my back needle has the working yarn coming out of it. Now this is what I'd call our starting position. So you always want to be in the starting position when you're moving from needle to needle, or when you're just starting off your Magic Loop, okay? This is the starting position. Both needles pointing to the right. The back needle has the working yarn coming out of the first stitch. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is grab our back needle and we're just gonna pull it loose so that the stitches on the back are just sitting on the cable and our back needle is just out and loose and we can just knit around with it. So now that my working needle is loose, I'm going to make sure that it goes underneath the working yarn. So I'm gonna grab my working needle and go underneath the working yarn like this, so that now the working yarn is on top of my needle and the cable that's attached to it, okay? The working yarn always goes on top. Now we're ready to join in the round. So I'm just gonna use my working needle and knit into the first stitch on my front needle. So I'm just gonna push my needle in, there we go, and wrap my yarn around and pull out a stitch, and then I'm gonna just drop it off the needle and I'll give it a little tug. And that little tug helps to reduce any gaps in between the join. Okay, so now we are joined in the round. I'm just gonna knit across the stitches on my front needle. All right, here we go. Just regular old knitting. And now I'm at the last stitch of my front needle. I'm just gonna knit that, and great. So now I'm gonna turn my needles around so that the needle tip is facing the right. We're almost in starting position. So I'm gonna grab the cable needle and pull it, and then push the stitches back onto the needle. This first round is a little bit on the tighter side, so I'm just gonna push it. So now we're back in starting position. Two needle tips are pointing to the right, and the back needle has the working yarn coming out of the first stitch. So now I'm gonna grab the back needle and pull it out so that the stitches on the back are being held on the cable. They're just hanging out, and my working needle is out and ready to start knitting. So now I'm going to make sure that the working needle goes underneath the working yarn. There we go. And now my working yarn is just up top. We're going to knit into the first stitch on the front needle. Insert my needle into that first stitch, grab the yarn, and start knitting into it. Do a little tug on that first stitch, and then just knit as normal across the rest of the stitches on my front needle. So we're essentially splitting our round in half. We're working half of the round and then turning our needle over and working the second half of the round. I'm at the end of the round, knit that last stitch, and there we go. I'm gonna turn my needle over again so that we're back in starting position. The needle tip is pointing to the right, and I'm gonna just pull the cable here so that the stitches will land back onto my needle. We're back in starting position. The needle tips are pointing to the right, and the back needle has the working yarn coming out of it. If you want a reminder on how to magic loop, then head over to my website where I break down the magic loop steps in a photo guide. I've also got all my tips and tricks there so you can quickly jog your memory. Bookmark the page so you can refer back to it anytime you want a magic loop. Link in the description. So you may be wondering why we want this back needle to go underneath the working yarn, and I'm just going to show you what happens when you don't do it. If you just grab a back needle and you just go straight into the first stitch on your front needle like this, you grab your yarn. If I wrap it around this first stitch, this loop just gets wrapped around the cable, right? So if I knit into this first stitch and then I give it a little tug, there is a new loop that we create right here. When you introduce new yarn overs into your knitting, you can easily knit into those yarn overs, adding stitches into your knitting. So we don't want that. So I'm going to place this stitch back onto my needle and just unknit it. And now you can really see where the working yarn gets wrapped around the back cable, and that wrap ends up becoming a yarn over. So we do not want that. That is why when we are grabbing our back needle, pulling it out, we always want to go underneath the working yarn, so that the working yarn is just free. It does not get embedded in this loop, okay? So when I say loop, what I mean is when you knit into this first stitch here, a little loop is made, right? So we want this working yarn to always stay out of that loop here. And now we're gonna just knit into that first stitch, tighten it up a little, and then just knit across the rest of the stitches on my front needle. Knitting across one half, and then turning your needle over and working the second half of your stitches. And that is really all there is to magic loop. After knitting a couple rounds, my swatch looks like this. It's perfectly joined in the round, and it's just split across these two needles. So how do you know where the beginning and end of the round is? Normally you would just put a stitch marker onto your needle, but when you're working magic loop, it's hard to put the stitch there because it's just going to fall right off, right? So you can actually just use this leftover yarn from your cast on to tell you where the beginning and the end of the round is. Just by looking at this little leftover yarn, I know that the beginning and end of the round is right here. So I don't even really need a stitch marker. If I wanted to, I could use one of these little split ring stitch markers, pin it onto my knitting to remind me that this is where the beginning and end of the round is, but I really don't need it because I've got this little leftover yarn tail from the cast on, right? So why do I give a little tug when I'm knitting into the first stitch of the front needle? The reason why I do that is to prevent laddering. So laddering happens when you're moving from one needle to another and your tension on your yarn goes a little slack. When you do that enough across that same point, you end up with what looks like a ladder, a vertical gap that just extends. So we really want to avoid that, and that's why we tighten up the first stitch when we are moving from one needle to another. I'm going to start working traveling magic loop to finish up this neckline. So normally with regular magic loop, I would just split the knitting in half, pull out the back needle, to then knit into these stitches on the front. That's regular magic loop. However, if I'm working traveling magic loop, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. Instead of splitting the knitting at the halfway point, I'm actually going to split the knitting kind of just a few stitches in from my back needle. So here's my back needle. I'm actually going to split the knitting around 5 or 6 stitches in. So my break is happening like 6 stitches in from my needle tips, and I can continue knitting like this. So as I knit this, it's going to start getting a little bit tight, so I can reconfigure my split. So my split was here before, and now I can just pull the needle through and close up that split. And now I can just re-split the yarn like a couple stitches down, split the yarn here, and that's 5 stitches down, pick up my yarn again, and continue knitting. Basically, I would re-split once the knitting starts feeling tight. Like right now, I've kind of filled up my needle, so I can split it again. I'm gonna pull my cable through, split it again, and then just continue knitting. And the great thing about this is that you won't get ladders in your knitting because you're just continually splitting the knitting across the whole round, right? So you're not just having one spot, the halfway spot, where you are splitting and risking getting ladders. Your split is happening just throughout the round. So this is really all there is to traveling magic loop. Basically, where you're splitting the knitting will travel with you as you knit.